Welcome back to Old War Stories with Uncle Jay. This one is entitled When Inspections Turned Sour. Here in New Yick, we have state inspections on our vehicles. So every year, you got to bring your car in and have it inspected. And they do a safety inspection and an emissions inspection. Now, in the old days, what they did was the safety has always been the same. Pretty much what they're supposed to do is bring the car in, put it up on a lift, and they'll check your tie rods and ball joints and make sure there's not excessive play in anything. They'll pull a wheel off in the front and the back and check your brakes. And it's sort of a money-making thing for both the inspection place, which is just a regular like mechanic garage kind of thing. Most of them can do inspections around here. It's sort of a money-making thing for them and also for the state. And it's supposed to be to protect against the environment and make sure your vehicle is always ready for the road and all this tax dollars things going on. So that was the deal. So pretty much if the safety inspection, like I said, they just check that stuff and they say, oh, well, you need brakes, can't pass you unless you get that done, and it's going to be $600 for brakes, and then you're fucked. You have to get them done. You don't have to have them do it, but then you have to pay for an inspection again. If they do the brakes, they'll do the inspection for you one more time and not charge you the inspection fee, which around here is $37. That actually has been pretty much unwavering. If you have an older car that does not take emissions inspection, which I'll get to in a second, so that would be cars older than 25 years around here. So in the 26th year, it is exempt from emissions. And if you have like a new car, I think the first 2 or 3 years, you don't have to have an emissions inspection done. Years ago, the emissions inspection was as simple as they would bring the car in, do the safety inspection, start it up, and stick this probe up the car's ass. And this probe would sense what the car is putting out, and then the computer would read this, and provided you were within spec, everything was good. Now, with the older cars, sometimes it wouldn't pass. And there were a couple ways around this. If your car was still kind of new but didn't pass, generally the guy would say, go drive around like 10, 15 miles and come back. And then he'd redo the inspection. And 95% of the time you'd pass. It was only if your catalytic converter was like totally out of whack and that would they do something else. Nowadays, they have nothing to do with any of that. The probe up the tailpipe is gone. They don't do that anymore. But there was a time where they added on to that, and I'll get back to that, which was the actual point of this to start with. Nowadays, they do the same safety inspection they always did, and they plug the state's computer into the OBDII port, and for the most part, as long as your readiness monitors are reading okay, and of course there not being a check engine light on, you pass. It reads it from the computer and that's it. It's not a true reading of what the car is actually putting out. These are your tax dollars at work, people. That's what they do today, is they just plug the car in. Now, if you have an older car that's not 25 years, that's not OBD2, then they still have the tailpipe probe and can still do that. But another thing they used to do in the old days is if you brought your car back and it didn't pass and you knew the guy, oftentimes he'd have another car and he'd just take the probe and stick it up that tailpipe and then you'd pass that way. And it's just under the table, and if you slipped him a couple of bucks, I'm sure he'd appreciate it and that. That doesn't work today with the OBD2. It has to work and that's it. There's no cheating the system. But they knew, the state knew, that mechanics were putting the probe up other cars' tailpipes to get your car to pass. So they said, okay, no more of that shit. All right. So it was one year when I had the old Chevy. late 1990s. Had the car for 2 years, maybe 3 at this point. I don't know. And it was time for inspection. So I went down to the place. I knew the guy there. He knew me. And, you know, I needed an inspection. And I went with my dad. And he opened the hood and he says, I can't inspect this. Why not? They changed everything. Oh? Yeah. There's a lot of things that they do now that they didn't do last year. He said, I had to pay thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to get a dynamometer put in. A dynamometer is the thing that these fucking street racer people do, where they put the car on and the wheels can turn without the car going anywhere, and then the computer reads how much horsepower in that. Well, the dynamometer wasn't for that. What this was the state decided that they would have the inspection take place on a closed course, and this closed course was the dynamometer. So he had to drive the car on the dynamometer, tie it down with all kinds of straps, and then there was a blower that had to be hooked to the exhaust, and the probe would somehow fit in that. Well, they stopped doing the blower soon after, because what had happened was this dynamometer thing, like most things where your tax dollars are wasted, was half-baked. Cars were not strapped down, and they went right through the fucking wall of the mechanic shop. Who's liable? The mechanic is liable, because the car came off the dyno. But another thing that would happen is when they would put the car on the dyno, they would run the car and it would idle for a bit, and then they'd put it in gear, and then the computer had a screen they'd have to watch, and they'd have to bring the speed up and down. They would do 55 miles an hour on the dyno and then bring it down to like 40 and then accelerate from there back up to 55. And if you overshot it like past 60, the whole test was invalid. They had to redo it, and then they had to use the brakes. So when you do that, the car would like lurch forward, because most cars were, including the old Chevy, was front wheel drive, and then you're braking those wheels. So the whole car is like, whoa, what's going on? Because the rear wheels are just sitting there, you know, and the car is strapped down. But he said, yeah, I can't inspect it. Why? He says there's too much oil on the engine. Now, the old Chevy leaked oil. We had that car for, I don't know, without figuring it out, let's say 5 years total. Never once changed the oil in that car in 5 years. Changed it when we got it, and that was it. It ran the same filter for the entire rest of its life, because it would change its own oil. It would leak oil every week. I was dumping a quart in this thing. That's how bad, or a half a quart in this thing, you know. That's how bad it was leaking. And it was leaking from everywhere, from the valve cover, from the main seal, from the oil pan gasket, from anywhere it could possibly come out of the engine, it would leak out of there. So it leaked oil, and it leaked bad, and the entire engine was covered in oil and road grime and stuff like that, and it was really, not for nothing, probably pretty unsafe to drive. But we did it. So that was it. And he said, I can't, this is going to catch fire. No, just do it. It'll be fine. He says, come here. And he brings us to another car, and he opened the hood. Engine fire. I guess from oil, I don't know. It didn't look like it was all that, but it burned up all the wiring harnesses, and this was a newer, like, computerized car, and it created all sorts of damage. I don't think this car was ever the same after, but he had to repair all these wires and all this stuff. All this shit burned up, hoses, fucking everything. The car was, like, destroyed. And he says, I can't accept this as a possible liability. This is costing me thousands as it is to fix this guy's car, you know. So what do we do? Here, go down to this place, gives us a business card or just tells us where it is. I don't remember. Tell them you need the engine steam cleaned. It was like a car wash place. Well, they didn't do steam cleaning. I guess he thought they did, they didn't. Basically what happened was we came in and we said we need the engine cleaned. Okay, they open the hood and they get a guy with some degreaser and a pressure washer. And my dad and I are standing there. And he sprayed the degreaser on there, let it sit for a bit. He's taking a pressure washer, really washing this thing down good. And that was some pretty caustic stuff, whatever he had, that degreaser stuff. This was like heavy-duty chemical stuff, and the smell from that, you could always, you knew this was serious shit that he put on there. And he's spraying this thing. The engine compartment is fucking soaked. So he sprays it all down. Obviously, the car was turned off. And then he says to the kid, okay, man, bring it on to the guy. Because they were Spanish. So the kid gets in the car, and this car was carbureted. Now, they didn't go and, cover up the air cleaner and specifically, they just watched what they were doing for the most part. And they hit what they had to hit and tried not to hit what they didn't need to. Now, this car, when the engine was hot, you would be able to just tap the key. And basically it went like this. If the engine was already running and it was hot and you drove someplace, let's say you stopped in a deli, got a sandwich, came out, and the Buick does this as well. You would get in, and a hot restart is awesome because you just fucking tap the key. Basically, you hit the key, the starter engages, it goes, vroom. So you just get, it just starts instantly. None of this fuel injection bullshit where it's got to have those 5-6 turns of the engine before it's going to fire, warm or cold, no matter what. Not like that. Nope. You would get in and get a hot restart. That's it. And it was running. And you would just throw and drive and go. That was it. Well, the kid gets in and he turns the key. And he doesn't know about the hot restart thing. He turns the key and he's just going to hold it until it starts. And it's just cranking away. It's not starting. Because everything's wet. And he tried it 3 or 4 times. And my dad and I looked at each other when the guy got the pressure washer out to start with. We looked at each other like, this is never going to start again. And that's exactly what happened. So, then what? The Spanish guy goes to the car. And he said, what's the matter, man? It's not starting. I don't know. It's just, let me get in. And the Spanish guy gets in. Idle. As well as it would idle. And then it ran. The Spanish guy knew how to start the car. The kid couldn't do it. He didn't have to pump the gas or do anything. He didn't need to be a millennial and not know how to start a carbureted engine. None of that. Nothing. It was like a car today. You turn the key and it starts. If it's going to, if everything is good, like it has been, chances are very good it's going to start. Didn't happen. But the Spanish guy got it to start. I don't know. Somehow, maybe the kid cranking it, I don't know. The Spanish guy got it to work. He had to try it twice or something, but he got it. And then it ran. And we drove back to the guy and opened the hood. And he's like, this isn't steam cleaned. Yeah, they don't do it. So he's like, well... And then he would take the blower and put it in front of the car to blow through the radiator. And that's what he did and got it inspected. Now, as far as, well, why can't you put another car on the dyno and stick the probe up there? They put cameras on top of the inspection station that would record video of the entire process. Holy shit. It went from, and then there were all sorts of other bottles of different kinds of gas that had to be injected to react with the stuff that's coming out of the tailpipe, and it had to like sense all this stuff and blah blah blah. And the years went on for a couple more years. Now, it gets a little interesting at this point because in the year that followed, lots more oil came out of the engine and soaked the engine down with oil. But now at this point, the guy was like, whatever, and he just went to inspect it. So here he is on the dyno, and he's revving this thing up, driving to 55 miles an hour, sitting still, and the engine's revving up, and you hear it really, I mean, it's running fast. It only had 3 gears, that thing. So, you know, you're doing 55, you're pulling like 3 grand out of that little 4-banger. So that was running pretty fast. And you would hear it. And the engine, even with that blower going right on it, that engine was getting fucking hot. And it wasn't liking it at all. And it never had a temperature gauge, so I never could tell. It only had that stupid idiot light that would come on. Basically, that would come on, engine ruined, you're dead. And that was that. So, anyway, that was the deal with it. And his garage, the oil would start burning off, and his entire garage would fucking fill with smoke. And we did this for like another 2 years or so until the transmission finally quit. And that was the end of the car. And then I got Old Clanky. And just as an aside, when I started with Old Clanky, they were still doing this crazy inspection thing with the dyno. And they put Old Clanky on there. So anyway, that passed. By the way, one time the old Chevy didn't pass, and he ran it again, and then it did. Even though I had made sure that engine was warmed up, it just didn't pass for the first time, and then it passed. So anyway, so now he puts Old Clanky on the dyno, and he does that, and he says, okay, 37, so I pull out $40, and he points to the dashboard, and he says, he had an accent, your ABS light is on. This is because the rear wheels do not spin on the dyno. So the computer thinks there's a problem and it puts the ABS light on. That will go out by itself after a few miles. And I'm like, he just broke my fucking car. He's right. It does do that. It's supposed to do that because the computer's like, this car is not operating the way it's supposed to, or 4 wheels on the ground. So, yeah, that ABS light comes on. And, yep, sure as shit, after a few miles, it went off, and everything's perfectly fine with it. So, anyway, that was the deal with that one. Couple years after, they just plugged the car in, the OBDII. If you got a check engine light, well, fuck you. It's going to cost whatever it costs now at your mechanic's normal rate. This still goes on today as such. You can still find guys that get things done for you if you pay a little extra, if you know what I mean. You got to know the guy, and we got guys, so it's all right. Anyways, that's the deal with that. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure you click like, make sure you click subscribe, and take care. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.